Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook, the COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our HCMx Radio podcast. I hope everyone's doing great today. I'm excited to welcome two of our guests joining me. We have Andrew Lawrence, the Vice President of HR, EL&PD from SCL Health. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
I'm doing great, Rachel. Thank you so much for having us here today.
It's my pleasure, our pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. And also I'd like to warmly welcome Angela Digmann. She's the Manager of Enterprise Learning and Personal Development from SCL Health. Hi, Angela, how are you?
Hi there, Rachel. I'm well. It's good to be here.
Fantastic. And before our topic today, we are going to be talking about the annual talent management process, how especially from the point of view and the lens from Andrew and Angela, how they transformed it at their organization. And before we get started, I would like to first ask Andrew to share a little bit about your background and to our listeners today, just so that they get to know you.
Well, absolutely. It's my pleasure to share with you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply privileged and honored to serve the mission of SCL Health in the capacity of our Vice President position for the Enterprise Learning and Personal Development Team, otherwise known as EL&PD. I have been in learning and development in HR for over 30 years. I've worked in lots of different areas ranging from transportation to energy, financial services, telecommunications, and have really found my home here in healthcare. It is a privilege to serve the community and to bring some of the experiences that I have had the pleasure of participating in, whether it's a enterprise resource planning implementation, which unfortunately I have too many of those under my belt to mention. Also electronic medical records implementations. Love the responsibility of developing others. And so I'm passionate about mentoring and coaching, and actually excited to be very close to wrapping up an executive coaching program and getting into some of the coaching responsibilities as I pursue that. And in my spare time, I like to do vocal coaching. I am a singer, so
Nice.
as Angela can probably attest, I'm singing most of the time, so happy to be here today.
Well, that's good to know. I know what our next, I might be inquiring from you. And we've had such a pleasure working with you over the years here at Brandon Hall Group, and you've been a great partner, both you and Angela. So it's really great to be here today. And Angela, can you share a little bit about your background as well?
Sure. I'm a manager reporting up through Andy. So I also am honored to be a part of SCL Health and a part of the EL&PD group. I have 20 years in the adult learning space in healthcare. I actually started out as a 7th grade teacher, teaching math and English to 7th graders, and that was rewarding and exhausting, and it was exciting to make the transition to adult education into healthcare. Along, as Andy stated, there's just something very rewarding about being in a space where people are faced with a myriad of challenges and finding ways to help them from a developmental perspective, meet them. The landscape, well before COVID, we were talking about how the landscape changes so rapidly, and trying to understand that well enough to help our leaders adapt to that is a big challenge. And so whether we're implementing an EMR or implementing a learning management system or a talent management system, whatever that might be, or developing material and training for them directly. I've been involved in all of that, and it's been a privilege to be a part of that here. That's
nice. And it's interesting that you were a teacher first, and then you transitioned into the corporate arena. So maybe I'll ask you, what do you find easier to connect with, or do you see students at that level adopt the learning quicker rather than adults?
Seventh graders were fun because they're excited. They're still young enough to raise their hand when you ask a question. They're very excited. They haven't quite developed that full high school level cynicism yet. With adults, the approach really has to be basic adult learning principle of you've got to connect it to what I'm doing. I'm so busy. For me to take the time to give you my attention, you better have something that makes my life better or makes me a better human. And so there's, I think, an imperative to really align what you're teaching to the problems that they're facing and keep that relevant.
And I think where we are positioned today, rather than probably when you first started 20 years ago, learning 20 years ago is more about perhaps you have to learn a skill for a job. It's mandatory. Some of it is maybe a nice to have. Sometimes, it didn't always connect with the learner as what I think learning professionals are trying to do today is really make it personal and make it very relevant, because they know they're just going to lose their audience if they don't. And so I think now the data and the needs and the interest are catching up to both the trainer or the learning professional and the learner. So it's really nice to kind of see where we are today. Andrew, do you want to kind of start us off and just sharing a little bit about your perspective as it relates to the talent management process and some of the challenges that you have that you've seen?
Sure. Rachel, one of the things that we try to do is take things down to very common denominators. And, there's that age-old question from a consulting perspective of what is the business issue that we're trying to solve? And so one of the things that we did, and there are a lot of folks to thank for their input, ranging from our Chief Human Resource Officer, Tammy Sinitis, to our marketing and communications team members, Darcy and Britta, and all of our HR professionals across the organization really had a great opportunity, or we tried really hard to make sure that they had a voice, and also our end users had a voice, because ultimately we started with our philosophy. And we feel very strongly that the talent management process is truly a process. It's an ongoing process. It's not a stagnant one-time type of circumstance. And, admittedly, some of our prior approaches seem to have that moment in time quality. And so what we've done is really tried to incorporate a philosophy whereby we are identifying skills and talents, and we're tying that identification to our strategic imperatives, everything from growth to an aligned clinical network. We talk about our strategic imperative of aligning and empowering our organization, and also clinical and operational transformation. And as you kind of indicated in your question to Angela, at the end of the day, adults are not like fifth graders. And one of the things that I learned in substituting, because I did some substituting along with Angela probably early on in my career, you don't bargain with a fifth grader, and you really can't bargain with an adult. It really comes down to being clear in your messaging and recognizing that philosophically, one of the things that we really are excited about is that we took a look at associate aspirations. And then we also look at the organization and what are our ministry requirements. And you bring those two worlds together almost like a Venn diagram. You get that overlap. That's really at the heart of our philosophy. And orbiting all around that is everything from succession planning, the actual talent management process, the ubiquitous 9-box assessment. How do you make that observational, behavioral, as opposed to just pulling a number out of thin air? There's the annual performance process, the merit and equity review process. We also have in Catholic healthcare our ministry formation. The the teachings of the Catholic Church that we have to honor, and we are proud to honor. There's also mentoring programs and executive coaching programs, ongoing learning and development, even interim assignments and project experiences. So we really took a philosophical view and created a formula, a framework, if you will, that we use to introduce or reintroduce our philosophy to our associates. And so that kind of goes back to that initial question, what's the business issue that we're trying to solve? We're trying to make conversation about career development an ongoing, regular part of the conversation. That is absolutely imperative. You know, we've seen such a change in our social agenda. We've seen changes in our political agenda, and we have to respond to those circumstances because the workforce is changing. So, you know, if we define training as teaching people how to do their jobs, we also have to balance that with education and creating those who are thought leaders. And so this is really part of our overall talent process. And it goes back to answering that very simple question. What are we trying to solve?
So you're still doing a lot of what you've done before, but it sounds like the way that you're going about it is slightly changed, and it's more centered around bridging both what the leaders want and what the end users want. And I'm going to turn it over to you. My question to you, Angela, we talked a lot about the end user perspective and the solutions. So what are some of the solutions that you have?
So much of it, Rachel, goes back to what Andy was saying in terms of what are the needs of the organization, and where we found ourselves, I'd say early summer of 2020 was between systems. We had just signed an agreement to go to Oracle for our human capital management as well as our employee support processes. And we knew that was our future, and actually that they had a talent management solution. However, that was not going to be in the cards for that year in terms of utilizing that technology. There's just so many aspects to that, and there were other functionalities that they were looking to turn on first. And so we knew we were going somewhere, but not quite there yet. That didn't stop the need of, hey, what are we going to do to develop our leaders and to support a talent strategy in the midst of a pandemic? I think that as challenging as the pandemic was for everyone, it allowed us to rapidly try some solutions that we might not have been able to otherwise, given the fact that we needed to find, I'll call it stopgap solutions that would help meet the need of our leaders and help us think through succession and through our talent and through, you know, how do we adapt to whatever might be coming as well as we can, and not only focus on the crisis. So with that in mind, we were looking through what technology is there, what have we done in the past, and what might we be able to do. We looked at, there had been a pretty strong paper process, which ironically with the pandemic, that also became a challenge because people aren't by their work printers and able to print out reams of paper. When you think about that, just kind of a different logistical issue than we've had in the past, but also how do leaders have a really good sense of the leaders coming up through their ranks, that horizon of where they're going to be going, what prepares them for the future, and looking at, might we be able to take paper in some low fidelity fashion and go to online in some way without using a software designed specifically for that. So that was the place that we found ourselves, and Andy can probably embellish the details. I'm summarizing some things there, but that was the challenge, and that was the imperative, I'll say, that I was brought in to partner with Andy on. So,
and what is working well is, and that aligns with our research, is that you really kind of started with your strategy, and you took a look at what you had, the inventory of what you had, and you know, a lot of other companies that also they continued to thrive or continue the momentum in their organization throughout the pandemic, is that they were able to look at this time as an opportunity to kind of rethink, reset, recalibrate kind of their approach. And so that's exactly what you've done. You start with your strategy, and yes, a lot of it was on paper, and you knew that you wanted to automate it, and yet, you weren't ready just to rush in, which is a lot better than just getting at something and not really being able to optimize it, or have something that's not a good fit for you. So you're the high performing organizations that we see in our research, the ones that have really start with strategy, tied it to your business objectives, which then in return is developing your people and having the right people in place. And so
just to tag on to what you're saying there, Rachel, I think it was also important to figure out a process that would be fairly pain-free, low training. Again, there's the option to defer the conversation for a year, right? And that was a valid option to think about. The question was, might we be able to create something that would help people in a crisis be able to simply know what they needed to do in front of them, right? Do that next step and move on with all the other challenges that they were facing. And so I think we've mentioned personas a little bit, but the development of a persona, what do I in my role need to do at this step, and making that very, very clear so that I'm not overwhelmed by complexity and challenges. Are there ways that we can help people get that information to us and get on with their day job / crisis management?
Did you have personas before, or was this something new to your approach?
I'll jump in on that one, Rachel. We leveraged, as Angela said, a paper-based process, and it was a very compact kind of 4 to 6 week process, and that's a lot of information to be able to have to process, not only for the end user, the leaders, direct leaders. So one of the things that Angela and I kind of collaborated on was we partnered with our IT organization and looked at collaboration. So we wanted to bring in that concept of collaboration. So we looked at collaboration tools. Do we buy? Do we blend? Do we build? And we've had a couple of cycles now kind of under our belts. We learned a lot during the pandemic, the calendar year 2020. We limited our focus at the vice president level and above. The conversations and the succession discussions were informative, but we learned a lot about the automation, the utilization of Google as a tool. We did not purchase other products off the shelf. So Angela is a whiz and can make that Google product sing almost as well as I can, even if I do say so myself. And we learned this year that one of the things we needed to really be deliberate about communication and about breaking the tasks assigned to those personas and introduce communication direct to the individual persona. So we had the manager, or we're all leaders of some form or fashion. So we do a self-assessment, and then our direct leader provides some additional feedback, and we reinvigorated. And really, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, but career conversations are so important, yet they oftentimes get pushed to the bottom of the list. And so we made it a very deliberate component of our experience this year to encourage those conversations, encourage them to happen more frequently, twice a year, 4 times a year, whatever your cadence is or what feels right. Not everybody in a very busy bedside care oriented environment is going to have the time to engage in those things, but we made a commitment, and then we broke out those responsibilities by persona. There were about 4 or 5 different personas, ranging from, like I said, the end user, the manager, the director, the vice president. We reinvigorated and kind of went back to basics and said, let's talk about calibration sessions. Why are they important? What do we want to accomplish through them? And it created this environment of collaboration, sharing. Obviously, we had to maintain a degree of confidentiality, so we put some safeguards in place to ensure that confidentiality. But when it was all said and done, it kind of culminated into a much more meaningful conversation about the talents and capabilities of our hardworking workforce. This year, we had over 910 leaders at the manager level and above participate in a program. We haven't had numbers like that historically. I haven't been with the HR organization for a tremendous period of time, but I know I have access to the history, and we've seen a steady incline. We've continuously kind of embraced the continuous improvement component of our DNA, our organizational DNA. And I think that this is a really great example of how we, as you said, I think we did do a good job of tying the business issue that we're trying to solve back to our strategic imperatives, and then building a roadmap, even to the point where we created a graphic that said, here are all the things that are going to happen over the course of 5 months. So we took it from 4 to 6 weeks and spread it over 5 months. It made it much more manageable, much more consumable, and it made the communication much more directed. And I think we got really great results when we had participation rates above 90%.
Wow,
so
that's great.
We hadn't had that before.
That's great. And what are some of your lessons learned?
Well, I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh.
One, it was perfect.
I wondered if you'd like me to talk a little bit about the technology side of that and how that was done, just to kind of flesh that out, because I think that helped us figure out how to get the level of penetration that Andy is speaking to. Would that be appropriate?
Sure.
Great.
Sure.
Yeah, from a technology perspective, as Andy mentioned, we had undergone a transition, I think, the year and a half prior to Google from Microsoft, and that had its own challenges, and one of them being actually people are not used to using it, and so that pushed toward using it as a challenge. So that was one factor to say, might we use Google for this need? And we were able to utilize the way that Google supports security management, where an end user can adjust the security for a subfolder in a way that we could create a sort of a cascading or a pyramid-shaped permissions tree, if you will, so that people had the ability to edit at the level that they were without seeing the things at the higher levels within that tree. And we could also use linked spreadsheets to pull data from one of those lower level spreadsheets or data entry points to a higher one. And so we were able to use a Google function called a query. It's a SQL-based functionality that pulled data from other locations into one. And so our HR leaders, our VPs, our executive VPs were able to see their responsibility trees, if you will, the lines of business or departments that they were responsible for. They could see all of that in one glance, and it all mapped into a 9-box graph. And so you could see right away within that 9-box where people landed. So some of that was through Google searching. Somebody in South Africa put together here's how you build a 9-box using Google tools. The site isn't even live anymore, but they showed the formulas and how to do that. And so we were able to adapt those to our needs and use that to roll that up, and then use the security permissions to make sure that only those who needed it would have access at the appropriate level. That was right in line with the directive. We needed something low fidelity, but it also made it easy. We didn't need people to be overly complicated in what they did. They could just click a link, go fill something out, and they were done. And behind the scenes, that roll-up would happen, and they would be able to see the results of that. So that tool actually helped us meet our need without, again, being a big database or a big implementation that we just did not have capacity to implement or budget, really.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. That's really good. And it also gives you kind of transitioning from that paper trail into making it somewhat automated, and then taking it then further as you are able to then bring on your enterprise system. So that's great. That's really innovative. Anything else? I know we're coming close to our wrap for today. Anything as far as any additional lessons learned? What's next? I heard that you might have a new product that you're working on as well.
Yeah, Rachel, we're excited. Angela and I are going to be partnering on our annual performance planning solution. And so we're going to be leveraging another interim solution as we prepare to move strategically toward our Oracle implementation in the future. But, you know, you asked the question about lessons learned. I definitely think that it takes a village. So communication is an important part of the lessons learned. The creation of the personas, I think, was a valuable approach that we took away from our implementation of our ERP. So we leveraged that, and also recognizing that the importance of having clear definitions for each of your 9 boxes, coming up with ways. You know, there's the halo effect. Everybody wants to be a 9. The reality of it is the lifeblood of the organization sits in that 5, 7, 8, even our 6 folks. So we really took time to be deliberate about our vocabulary, reintroducing clear definitions, even in the face of diversity and inclusion, being thoughtful about the word choice and the intent behind the selection of words, moving away from high potential to a highly promotable status or quality, and really looking at it from a behavioral perspective. We're very fortunate that we have clear leadership behaviors that help guide us, and those thoughtful conversations all coming together really, it's a credit to many people. And I would say keep the lines of communication open and really tie back to what are you trying to accomplish, and let's not make it more cumbersome. Let's just make it easy and meaningful and valuable, because that's what's going to drive engagement, and ultimately it's going to drive performance.
Absolutely.
I have a few lessons learned from the technology perspective that are specific to that. If anyone is thinking about that approach, definitely you need the clarity that Andy is speaking to, because if an 8 to me means a 5 to you, we're going to have problems in terms of calibration. That leadership insight is absolutely critical to making decisions on how you'll roll it out. From a technology perspective, like nuts and bolts perspective, I would say absolutely test it and test it and test it, because it's low fidelity. The minute you make a copy, now you have to update 2 things. So if you have 100 leaders and you're making 100 copies, you better make sure that every formula works and that people have filled it out and tried it again and again, and you know where their issues are and you fix them before you make all those copies and then have to manually fix everything. And then one other little tip would be Google specific, but if you point to a view-only version of a spreadsheet, people don't always know how to make a copy, and they send you a permissions request, which might not sound like a big deal, but when you get 100 or 1,000 of those, that gets a little overwhelming. So creating a template view of a document so that when they click it, they just use the template and create a new copy, and they're not trying to get access to a source file, but rather just creating their own copy to use that forward. I know that's very techy, but if anyone is looking at this, that was a huge win for us in terms of time and support. We also had
actually, that's happened to me in a different situation, so that's a really good point to make.
Yeah, yeah. So I know I'm getting very technical, but that can impact the whole ease of use for everyone, honestly. So I think it's worth mentioning.
And then people get annoyed, and then they don't want to even bother. So just that very, sometimes it's just those little things. I see it everywhere. Like we had, and this is just separate, I had our daughter's first soccer game this Saturday morning, and someone sent out the wrong address. And even though we had the address, but it was on a different app, and then half of us followed the wrong address, which is like 9 minutes away. The fields were huge. So needless to say, sometimes those little setbacks, some of us started the game late, we can get penalized also if you don't have enough players. So it's our first game of the season. However, in spite of everything, we lost, but it was 3-2. So it was close. However, if our team would have been more prepared, maybe we wouldn't have had before I was there with my daughter, they've already scored 2 points. So the other team. So anyway, so it's little things like that, whether it's in the workplace or outside, if you could just be ahead of those things or really kind of consider all the what ifs, it'll really help in your planning. I have another question
I mean,
to you.
go ahead.
This is, well, I'm just curious, what kind of music do you like to perform?
I love all forms of music, but I am privileged to work with a national recording artist who specializes in everything from jazz, rhythm and blues, Broadway to pop. And it's been a real wonderful experience to have a coach myself and to recognize the importance of listening not only to others, but also listening to yourself, and maybe not listening with such a critical ear, and realizing that your connection with your audience is the most important component of the performance. And I am deeply privileged to work with actually Linda Etter is the recording artist.
Oh, nice. Well, we were talking earlier, we're excited about hosting our conference next year. And we may have to talk offline about potential performance opportunities. And Angela, right. I did cut you off before. You had another thing to mention, I think.
It was really tagging on to what you were saying, Rachel, in terms of design. It might feel like, why am I spending time making the font a little bit bigger and really clean and basically making the sheet a place someone wants to be versus a painful, I don't understand what I'm doing and it's complicated and detailed. Just that kind of testing as well, that design side really can help. If you want participation and engagement, even if you're in a low fidelity system, that doesn't mean you can't spend some time on that experience. And so that was my thought there.
Well, it's a good way to leave off. And also I wanted to congratulate your team for your Excellence Awards wins this year. And we look forward to celebrate with you in January of next year. All goes well. So thank you both. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Angela, for joining me today. It's been a fun discussion around, one of the most important topics that your organization can focus on is your talent. And so, but you really should look at it as an opportunity and something like, and approach it in a way that you both have, because you obviously are moving in the right direction, and you really have taken this time as a way to recalibrate and transform your approach. And so I wish you a lot of luck and success. And I know that I will be partnering with you along the way, so it'll be exciting to see what the future holds. Thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining us and listening in or watching us. Wishing you all a very happy and healthy and productive day.